the last book of the Bible, which is the book of Revelation. Now, let me just tell you a quick pet peeve of mine, and that is this. It is the book of Revelation, not Revelations. There was only one revelation, and that is in the book here. So let's look at the book of Revelation and make sure you have your notes as we go through this time. So we're talking about authorship. This is John, the son of Zebedee. He is known or refers to himself 5 times throughout this book, mostly in chapter 1 and then towards the end of the book in chapter 21 and 22. And John is the only one that could have used his name and the book be accepted. And the Gospel of John and the book of Revelation both use the same word to refer to Jesus, and that is the Word. For example, in John 1:1, the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. It's the same way that he uses it in the book of Revelation. And then, of course, the date, which we'll talk about in a second, also fit with the other writings that John does. Remember, John writes 5 books in the New Testament. They are John, 1 John, 2 John, 3 John, and then the book of Revelation. The book of Revelation takes place around AD 95 to 96. There is a strong tradition that the church's history dates during the reign of Domitian, and he is writing to the churches of Asia Minor who have a considerable history in the early church, and that this persecution is more universal to Nero's, which took place around AD 70. His persecution was worldwide. It was all over the Roman Empire. John tells us that he is writing from the island of Patmos. He says in Revelation 1:9, I, John, your brother, who share with you the distress, the kingdom, and the endurance we have in Jesus, found myself on the island called Patmos because I proclaimed God's word and gave testimony to Jesus. John is exiled to this island of Patmos for sharing the gospel. He is actually the only disciple that does not face death through some kind of persecution. He survives and is exiled to the island of Patmos. Now, John tells us that he is writing to the 7 churches, and those are in Asia. He says that he is going to give them, he says, from the 7 spirits who are before the throne. And so he's writing to these 7 churches. And there is some discussion that is given of whether or not these 7 churches are an immediate discussion, or are they for a kind of a interpretation through the ages of the church. One idea is that they're an order of the letters because of the way the roads connect to them. So he writes to Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergam, Thyatira, Philadelphia, and then Laodicea. Another discussion is that he is writing in an interpretation order, the church age of history, and that there is some kind of idea that and way that they relate through the 7 ages. That is a discussion and what is called historical premillennialism, and that is that there are 7 distinct ages. Ephesus would be from the early church, okay, during John's writing. The church at Smyrna would be from around the 1st century to around the mid-3rd century where they had, Smyrna would be the 1st century through the 3rd century, where there was a great persecution. Pergamum would have been 3rd century through around 500, where Christianity had found favor and they had become the state religion. Thyatira would cover from around 500 AD to around 1500. This is during the most corrupt time of the Catholic Church. Philadelphia would have been during Sardis would have been during the Reformation period. Philadelphia would have been during the 1700s to 1900s, during the Great Revivals, and then Laodicea would have been the 1900s to the present. And so there's this idea. I am personally not one who subscribes to this idea, although I see it, because I think there are churches today that fit any of these churches as we would see them. And so here we have kind of a local picture. We start here with Ephesus, and we move around the circle here: Smyrna, Pergam, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, and then Laodicea. It's actually interesting that even though Paul had been through a lot of these cities during his missionary journeys, it is only Ephesus that has a book written to it previously. But overall, universally, that it is a matter for the entire church. It's to everyone who hears. He repeatedly says that in the early parts of the book of Revelation. To him who hears has ears to hear. And everyone who hears, he keeps repeating this idea. So universally, even though it's written to the local churches in this time, it's meant to be applied universal. So please do not get caught up in the idea that, hey, it's only to that church, it doesn't apply to me, but it does. It applies to all people. John writes for one specific occasion, and that he's on the island of Patmos, and he has the reception of these visions from God. Excuse me. The purpose, though, is then to prepare the believers for the coming of Jesus. This is his second coming, to encourage them in the churches and to reveal the divine judgments that fall on those who are unrepentant, and to exhort believers to persevere despite any persecution or hardship that may be coming about. The theme is about the triumph of the King. The King has overcome. He says in a key verse, "Behold, he is coming with the clouds, and every eye will see him, even those who pierced him, and all the tribes of the earth will mourn him." Now, one of the issues that needs to be discussed is the idea of the style. The imagery is apocalyptic. He's giving a very apocalyptic end times style of writing. But it reads like a letter. But it calls itself prophecy because it's happening in the future. So basically, to combine all those, we're going to call it a prophetic book that employs apocalyptic imagery that is sent in a letter form. Now, you could go to one of the bookstores, Christian bookstores in Hickory, and you can go and find the books on Revelation, and you're going to find a lot of different books written by a lot of different people with a lot of different views. There are basically 4 ways to interpret the book of Revelation. And we're going to call those interpretive grids. The first grid is what we call the idealist. Second would be the historist. A third would be the preterist. and the last would be the futurist. So we're going to walk through these and understand what each view means. The idealist view is also what we call amillennialism. Now, amillennialism is the belief that there is no literal reign of Christ on the earth. The book of Revelation talks about that at the end there'll be 1,000-year reign of Christ. Amillennialists believe that that really will not happen. This view teaches that Christ's reign is currently going on in the hearts of men and women, the church, but it's not a worldwide scope. They also believe that the 1,000 years is to be understood as a symbolic, but not a longer period. And so the apocalypse is not to be constructed as a representation of actual events, but the book is only there to give us the struggle or the metaphor between good and evil. Now, the historical view is what we call post-millennialism. And in post-millennialism, that Christ will return at the end of the 1,000-year reign. So there will be 1,000 years, and at the end of that, Christ will return. And then some people who hold this view that the 1,000 years is literal, some think it's symbolic, but the idea is that Revelation is really a panoramic of church history, and we're kind of in that time, and after that 1,000-year time, that Christ will return. Now, the preterist view believes that the book of Revelation only took place during the first century, and that any things that's talked about in the book are only took place during the first century, and after that no longer applies to the church today. Now, the last one, and this is the view that I subscribe to. Now, if you subscribe to one of the other ones and you want to discuss it, that's great. I'm not going to hold that against you. This is the view, and this is how the view that I am using to teach the book of Revelation from. But it's not necessarily something that we need to get in such a great discussion that we are fighting over which view is the best. But for me, I believe that Christ will begin, and he will in turn usher in during the premillennial stage the 1,000-year reign of Christ. It is a time when Christ will return. There will be a 1,000-year reign of Christ on this earth, during which there will be peace and righteousness. And so that at that time, he will begin his throne prior to the new heaven and the new earth. Beginning with chapter 4, what I believe is beginning with chapter 4 in the book of Revelation, the church is no longer present, and we are beginning that time leading up to Christ's 1,000-year reign on this earth. So those are the four views. Now, again, I am teaching this book from a premillennialist stage. If you have a different view, that's okay. I'm not going to argue with you about that. I do want you to understand that that is where I come from as I teach the rest of this book. Now, one of the things that we can get caught up with in the book of Revelation is all the symbols. What do these symbols mean? What do these symbols mean? And some people get so caught up on that they miss the story. But I do want to point out to you, not to get caught up, but I do want to talk to you about how numbers are used in the book of Revelation. Because they do symbolize things, and it's helpful to understand what they are symbolizing. The number 1, when it is used, is to represent unity or independence. For example, in Revelation chapter 1, verse 13, one like the Son of Man, that he is independent, not like anybody else. The number 2 is used to show an increase. So there will be 2 witnesses. There is a confirmation. There's a fellowship. There are 2 things. It's showing an increase of what is going on. The number 3 is reference to God and the link to divinity, especially when the angels cry out, "Holy, holy, holy." And when you see things in 3, that's usually a triad in reference to the divinity or the Trinity, in which God is shown to be divine. Now, the number 4 is used to represent either the world or creation. So the 4 living creatures, or the 4 horsemen, or the 4 angels. We are talking about a world in creation. The number 5 or the number 10 implies things that are secular. So, and then 10 is really just an intensity of that. So the church in Smyrna will have tribulation 10 days. There's also places and others where you have things like the 10 plagues, the 10 tribes of the northern kingdom that go off into captivity, the 10 spies who say, hey, it's too big to come back, we can't take it. And so there's something that is man-made, it's secular, of the world. Now the number 12 will represent God's election. So we have the 12 tribes of Israel, the 12 apostles of the Lamb, the 12 foundations, the 12 gates. Multiples 12 are also important. So the 24 elders, the 144,000 show that God is in the redemptive story of humanity. Number 6 is the idea that we want to try to be God, but we fall short. And then in numbers like the 666, which is the Antichrist trying to show his perfection, but how he falls short in that time. And the last number would be the number 7. And that is the number of completion. 7 cannot be divided equally, meaning that any breakdown of God's perfection will yield utter disaster. Now, please understand that these numbers are important. We don't want to get bogged down in the numbers, but we do want to understand how God is revealing it to us. Now, what we want to understand is one of the key ideas in the book of Revelation is what is called the rapture. And that is when does the church itself disappear from the presence of the earth, the believers. And we call that idea the rapture. Now, the doctrine of the rapture assumes a couple other biblical doctrines to be true. First, we have to believe that Jesus indeed rose from the grave. We have to understand that Jesus is alive and that he's in heaven today. And that Jesus is coming again, although he's not coming like he did the first time as a baby, he's coming the second time for the church. Now, I want us to talk about what, when, who, where, why, how of the rapture. We have to understand that and what it is. The word rapture, it comes from the Latin rapio, or in Greek, raptizio, which means caught up. Now, the word rapture itself does not appear in the Bible, but the words caught up appear in the English Bible. So places like 1 Thessalonians, we shall be caught up to meet him in the sky. The book of 1 Corinthians, the book of Matthew, all give ideas of being caught up to Jesus. Now, 1 Thessalonians describes 2 groups that will be caught up. First is the dead in Christ. Those are people who have previously asked Jesus Christ to be their personal Savior, who have already passed on. And then those who are alive and remain. And this is for the church. This is not for people outside the church. This is only for people who are in the church who have a personal and intimate relationship with Jesus Christ. Now, one of the things that we want to understand as we get to this is we want to understand a couple things. There is what is called the Great Tribulation. That is a period of time when the Antichrist rules the earth. Now, the Antichrist is the person who is the antithesis or the opposite of Christ. Hence the reason he is called the Antichrist, opposite. And he will just try to deceive people into following him as if he were Jesus. Now, back in the Old Testament, the book of Daniel, Daniel has a vision of world history which is called the 70 weeks. And it's during this last time in which the tribulation takes place, which will last for 7 years. Now, there are several views of the rapture. When will the rapture take place? Okay. Now, one, we're going to make clear, very clear right now. No one knows when it's going to happen. If you hear somebody say that the rapture is going to happen on this day, run in the opposite direction because they have no idea what they're talking about. But what I want to talk about is different times in which the rapture will happen. Again, there are some different views, okay? And I will give you my view. And again, this is the way in which I'm teaching the book. I have friends, even people within my own congregation who hold the different views. But I want to give you the three views and kind of draw out a picture of when those would happen. The first one is what's called the post-tribulation. People that hold this view believe that the rapture will take place after the Great Tribulation. Now, I am going to do my best to draw this out for you on the screen. So, let me draw a not so straight line. And there are 3 points that we're going to see on this line. Okay? All right. Over here is the beginning of the tribulation. I'm going to mark that. I'm going to mark that by BT. Beginning tribulation. This is the end. And this is the middle. Okay. So post-tribulation would look like this. Post-tribulation would say the tribulation here lasts for 7 years. Okay. So this would be 3.5. This would be 3.5. Post-tribulation would happen here. This is post. Okay. Which means this. Believers would go through the entire tribulation time. Then Jesus will call us up to meet him in the sky. Now, if you put post-tribulation together with a premillennialism, then you would return right back down for the 1,000-year reign of Christ. Okay? Now, the second one is what's called the mid-tribulation. that means that Christ will return during the middle. So the mid-tribulation would happen after the first 3.5 years. Now, the first 3.5 years is covered from the book, which really the first 3.5 years, according to the seals, is a time of peace. But at the midpoint in that tribulation, before the last part begins, Christ would return. So the church would be raptured at this point, would go up, and then would return at the end of the second 3.5 years for the 1,000-year reign of Christ on the earth. Now, for me, I am what is called a pre-tribulationist. Right? That is, that it happens before the tribulation. So the rapture, this is pre, I'm going to put pre here, or I'm going to attempt. The rapture happens, and that is the point at which the tribulation begins. And then Christ again, everybody will return for the 1,000-year reign of Christ. Okay. Here, with post, believers go through the entire tribulation. Mid-tribulation, believers go through the first 3.5 years, but are raptured out before the second 3.5 years. Pre-tribulation, the entire church is raptured out prior to the tribulation beginning. This is what I believe is represented by the beginning of chapter 4 and chapter 5, when there is the absence of the church mentioned after that. Now, again, I am teaching from this view right here. But if you want to hold one of these other two views, that's great. I had a professor in seminary said, I'm a pre-trib, and if you're a mid-trib, that's fine. I'm just up there 3.5 years in heaven more than you. Now, where will the rapture occur? There are some who think that the rapture is only limited, but the Bible gives us no indication. The rapture is not limited to a certain area, but it's all those who have a relationship with Jesus, the dead in Christ, and those who are alive and remain when Jesus steps out and calls us home. Now, there are two terms that we need to understand about how it will happen. One is Christ appearing, and one is Christ coming. At the rapture, these two events, if you hold to a pre-tribulation, these are two different events. Christ appearing happens at the beginning. Christ's second coming happens at the end. Mid-tribulation is the same thing, except there's a delay 3.5 years. So his appearing happens 3.5 years into the tribulation. Then he returns for the second coming. Post-tribulation, again, those are at the same time. Now, one of the great things, and I wish really I had more time in this class to discuss it, I could probably teach a class just on the book of Revelation and we could fill up a semester. But no matter what your view of the rapture might be, I think we can agree that these judgments that you read about in the book of Revelation really are events that we have never seen before. And there are 3 sets of judgments that happen in the book. From chapter 6 and chapter 8 are what are called the 7 seal judgments. There's a seal that's broken and a judgment is revealed that happens on that time. The first seal is broken, and that seal lasts the first 3.5 years. First seal is equal to 3.5 years. So the second seal through the seventh bowl So the remaining 6 seals, the 7 trumpets, and then the 7 bowls, that is 20 judgments altogether, last the last 3.5 years. And they begin to pick up in intensity and quickness. There's no time on how long they last, but they will pick up. This chapters 8, 9, and 11 talk about the 7 trumpets, and the 7 bowls are revealed in chapter 16. Now, really, the way that this looks out, and I hope I can draw this out for you. Let me do something real quick, and we're going to come back. Okay. I hope I didn't mess anybody up. If you can rewind the video a little bit. All right. We have seals 1 through 7. The 7th seal right here starts the first trumpet. The first trumpet goes through to the 7th trumpet, and the 7th trumpet starts the first bowl, which goes to the end. So really, if you look at it that way, this trumpet and the bowl judgments are all eventually wrapped up in this 7th seal. I hope that made sense. If you are confused or have some more questions, please email me about that idea. Let me put up here the key facts. And listen again. I could spend this semester talking about the book of Revelation, and we would just scratch the surface. I taught the book of Revelation at my church on Wednesday nights, and it took me almost a year to do it just on one night a week. There's a lot in there, and it just takes a lot of time to get through it. But here are your key facts. He's writing to the 7 churches of Asia Minor, but really to all of Christendom, the whole idea of Christ. He's writing from the island of Patmos. This is the last book written by John. It's also the last book of the New Testament. It's about the triumph of the Lamb, and his key verses, Revelation 1:7. Don't forget, when you finish this week's assignments, there is a review for the exam. The exam will have some multiple choice questions. It will also have some short answer questions. There is a study guide up on Blackboard. You may use the study guide for the short answers. You may use that to answer the questions on the exam. You may not use anything else to help you. If you have questions, please don't hesitate to email me. I really hope that you've enjoyed this semester. If there's anything I can ever answer for you, or if you have questions about, please do not hesitate to send me an email or stop by my office if you are on campus. I hope everybody had a great semester, and I look forward to meeting you or seeing you around campus.